24th, 1971, a middle-aged man who appeared to be in his mid-40s wearing a dark suit boarded the Northwest Orient Airlines Flight 305 in Portland along with 36 other passengers, 6 crew members, and was on his way to Seattle, Washington. The man identified himself as Dan Cooper. Once aboard, he made himself comfortable in the middle of the last row seat. He ordered a drink, bourbon and soda while the flight was waiting to take off. When the flight decided to depart a short time after 3 p.m., Cooper handed the stewardess Florence Schaffner an envelope. Inside the envelope was a handwritten message disclosing, quote, "I have a bomb here and I would like you to sit by me." Schaffner, being stunned, decided to do what she was told. As Cooper was fiddling with his cheap attaché case, Florence took a glimpse on it and what she saw completely shook her. There were 8 sticks of dynamite inside Cooper's briefcase. Cooper demanded that she write down what he told her to do and obey every single order. His demands were really simple. He wanted $200,000 in $20 bills by 5 p.m. He also demanded a fuel truck to stand ready to refuel the aircraft once they have reached their destination, which was Seattle, Washington. And if they had failed to comply with his demands, Cooper threatened them by saying, "I'll do the job." As Schaffner heard Cooper's ultimatum, she decided to inform it to the cockpit crew, while Tina McCullough, another flight attendant, remained by Cooper's side, acting like an intermediary between Cooper and the flight crew by using a telephone. For the next hour and a half, the flight decided to fly around Seattle while the federal authorities scrambled to procure the ransom. The money was collected from the local bank in $20 bills while the owner of the nearby skydiving school supplied the parachutes. At around 5:45 p.m. when the flight landed in Seattle, McCullough provided Cooper both the money and the parachute, and the hijacker allowed the flight's 36 passengers to disembark. Many of whom had no idea that the flight had been hijacked. However, he forced 2 pilots, a flight engineer and a flight attendant, to remain on the plane, and the plane took off again. Cooper ordered the captain to set a course for Mexico City, but this demand of Cooper wasn't fulfilled. First of all, the flight was unable to fly non-stop to the destination, which was Mexico. Cooper proposed a refueling stop at Phoenix, Yuma, or Sacramento. Later, they all agreed on Reno, Nevada. Second of all, it wasn't possible to depart from the extended ventral staircase. He ordered McCullough to stay by his side and teach him how to extend the staircase once the plane was in air. 5 minutes later, after having the conversation, he ordered McCullough to head to the cockpit and not to disturb him now. McCullough decided to join the rest of the cabin crew members and lock the cockpit door behind her. And some 3 hours later, Flight 305 decided to land in Reno. Per Cooper's instruction, the plane was to fly under 10,000 feet at a speed lower than 200 knots. A little after 8 p.m., the crew carefully decided to open the cockpit door and move to the rear of the cabin. What they saw left them completely stunned. There was no sign of Cooper nor the bomb. The after stairway was extended mid-flight and was damaged while landing. At some point between Seattle and Reno, Cooper had strapped on a parachute and jumped into the void, completely disappearing into the unknown. But where did Cooper land and what became of him? The questions linger, but where did Cooper land and what became of him? The FBI's extensive record on DB Cooper describes him as a white male in his mid-40s with brown eyes and black hair. He was wearing a dark suit, white shirt and a black tie and dark shoes. Based on this description, the FBI produced the first several composite sketches of DB Cooper. The FBI launched what would become one of the longest and most exhaustive investigations in its history, known as No Jack. For Northwest hijacking, they interviewed hundreds of people, cracked leads across the nation, and scoured the aircraft for evidence. By the 5-year anniversary of the hijacking, they had considered more than 800 suspects and eliminated all but 24 from consideration. Some of them were ruled out on the basis of DNA that was eventually recovered from the tie Cooper took off before jumping. Initially, the agency believed that Cooper knew both planes and the area. One prime suspect was Richard Floyd McCoy, who was arrested for a similar crime several months later. However, he was eliminated as a suspect. Perhaps it was said that Cooper didn't survive his jump from the plane. After all, the parachute he used couldn't be steered. His clothing and footwear were unsuitable for a rough landing, and he had jumped into a wooded area at night. However, following an extensive search, nothing further was discovered. In 2016, the agency officially closed its investigation, stating that its resources could best be used on other cases. Where did DB come from? It was apparently a myth created by the press. The FBI did question a man with the initials DB, but he wasn't the hijacker. The daring hijack and disappearance remains an intriguing mystery despite an extensive manhunt and countless theories. The FBI turned their attention to those 200 grand which Cooper requested. The money was collected from Seattle First National Bank, which kept an emergency package of 250 grand in total for such an occasion. With this, the $10,020 bills which were handed over to Cooper had been documented in advance. The intention of FBI was to make it as difficult as possible for Cooper to spend his money. Northwest Airlines and several newspapers even began to offer rewards to anyone who was having a note with the matching serial number. But this plan failed at the moment. No one ever came to them with the same $20 bill. That is, until a decade later in 1980, a young boy found named Brian Ingram found a rotting package full of $20 bills that matched the ransom money serial numbers. It was buried along the Columbia River north of Portland and some 20 miles from Ariel. Ingram's parents decided to bring the severely degraded money bundles to the FBI. The FBI then took custody of the money until 1986 when a court divided it among Ingram. By the time the press got aware of the hijacking, the FBI had already begun to investigate their few prime suspects. Among them was a man in Portland with the name DB and surname Cooper. But he was quickly eliminated of the suspect list, but due to a mix-up by the press, the name Dan Cooper was confused to DB Cooper. Later, when the pilot recalled Dan Cooper's demand to the air traffic control team, he said, "I want money in negotiable American currency." The term negotiable American currency seemed fishy, as an American citizen would never specify American currency. Perhaps it was determined that Cooper wasn't American. A more under-the-radar suspect through the years had been Sheridan Peterson, who fell under suspicion within a week of the skyjacking. Peterson, a former Boeing employee, worked in the department that wrote the flight manual of the Boeing 727 jet that was hijacked. Unlike Cooper, Peterson had blue eyes, not brown, which made FBI shrug him off the prime suspect list. The next prime suspect was Kenneth Christiansen, who had a more direct link to the Cooper incident. He had worked for Northwest, the hijacked airline, as a mechanic, flight attendant, and a purser. Kenneth's brother Lyle claims that when Kenneth was on his deathbed in 1994, he said, "There's something you should know, but I cannot tell you." The year after the DB Cooper hijacking, despite being on a modest flight attendant salary, he bought a house in cash.